G'day everyone and welcome to the Deep Space Communication Complex just outside Canberra. The road trip continues on this edition of Sci-Fi Weekly.
So our complex is a part of NASA. We're part of NASA's Deep Space Network. We're one of only 3 stations in the world that has this important task, and that's to provide all the communications to all the dozens of spacecraft that are out there, exploring the solar system, visiting planets, moons, asteroids, comets, looking deep into space, other stars and galaxies, watching our own star, of course, our sun every day, and then a bunch of other spacecraft, keeping a broad eye around our core in the universe, good old planet Earth.
With most of the solar system moving below the ecliptic plane in the next few years, Tidbinbilla is expanding and will become an even more integral part of the Deep Space Communication Network.
There are so many spacecraft out there, we simply need more antennas to be able to talk to all these extra craft, and you know, NASA's budget is always tight and that's what funds the entire complex. But none of the new antennas are new money. It's actually all money we've had to save over the last decade from our general budget so that we can afford this $110 million investment.
So it's really about expanding the ability to communicate with the satellites in terms of there's more stuff happening at the same time?
Yeah, well, if you take, for example, a place like Mars. Mars is the traffic jam of the solar system right now. There are 7 spacecraft there, 5 in orbit, 2 on the surface. We've got another one on its way at the moment. There are many more missions planned over the next 4 or 5 years. We could have up to a dozen spacecraft exploring Mars by the end of this decade. So needing this antenna time, the extra dishes to be able to listen in on their signals and get the commands to those spacecraft is essential.
Glenn, we're standing in front of the Honeysuckle Creek dish. It was moved in the 80s when that site was decommissioned. Tell us a little bit about what this dish is famous for.
Well, probably most people know about the role of Australia in a particular space event, and that was the Apollo 11 moon landing back in July 1969. Most people know that story because of the movie The Dish, talking about the Parkes radio telescope in New South Wales.
Astronaut Neil Armstrong lands on the moon. People all over the world will be watching television pictures provided by the receiving dish in the town of Parkes.
So what's this all about?
We've got the moonwalk.
Eh?
The moonwalk?
Why'd they pick us?
Turns out it's the largest radio telescope in the Southern Hemisphere.
But it's a movie rather than a documentary. What actually happened on that day was pretty exciting. We had several stations in Australia that were providing support to Apollo 11. There was the station at Carnarvon in Western Australia, there was our station here at Tidbinbilla, and there was Honeysuckle Creek, which is about 25 kilometres southwest of here. But the original plan by NASA was to actually use their dish in California to get those pictures, you know, to show their guys, 2 Americans walking on the moon, beating the Russians there, winning the space race. But they had a problem. When they received that signal from the moon, the picture that they got at the Californian station, which they sent to Houston, was unfortunately upside down.
Currently it's upside down on our monitor, but we can make out a fair amount of detail.
So that was a bit of a sort of a doh type of moment for NASA. So they looked to Australia, of course. Now, they had the use of the Parkes radio telescope, but Parkes didn't have a picture at the critical moment. And that's because, and they depict this in the film, the moon hadn't risen high enough in their local skies yet, so they had to wait a little while before they were going to get a picture. So NASA looks to the Honeysuckle Creek station, and this dish here was the smallest dish in the world, providing that communication at 26 metres. And so they had a picture, they had a great picture, and it was the right way up. NASA saw that on their screens, flicked the switch just in time, so that 600 million people around the world could witness Neil Armstrong taking his final few steps down the ladder, putting his left foot on the surface of the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So that switch break that we see in those pictures that are immortalised in history now, that switch break there is Houston switching from California to Honeysuckle Creek.
Yeah, and one of the reasons the picture was actually upside down was because the guy who was the video technician at that station actually called in sick that day, and so his backup was on, and his backup had forgotten to flick one particular switch out of many hundreds the right way around. So that picture was upside down. The picture wasn't great quality either. It was very dark, contrast. Blacks were very black, whites were very white. Couldn't get a lot of detail. So yeah, the pictures coming from Honeysuckle Creek were beautiful, the right way up, and that's what everybody watched. About 8.5 minutes into the broadcast, Parkes started to get a picture as the moon got higher in their skies and they could get that clean signal. So then up in Sydney at ABC TV studios, the video technician up there spends a few minutes going Parkes, Honeysuckle on his monitor, and decides about 8.5 minutes in, yeah, Parkes looks like it'll get a good picture, switches over. Neil's already on the moon, he's collecting samples, doing everything else, and Buzz is about to come out, and they carry the rest of the moonwalk. So Honeysuckle get on with its key job, and that was keeping the astronauts alive, providing voice and data communication.
Right, okay. Now that movie that was depicted, called The Dish, which many people have seen around the world many times over, depicts a few, or creates a few myths, doesn't it?
It does. Number one, we do not play cricket on dishes. That's an absolute. Back in 1969, the Parkes dish was mainly just a steel wire mesh. You couldn't walk on it, let alone play cricket on it. Today its dish surface is a little bit more solid, and for the movie they wanted to depict the actors in there showing the scale of the dish and wanted them doing something, so the cricket idea came up. But an interesting side note is that for our big dish here, before it was built, that's the part where, that's the bit of ground where our station staff had their cricket pitch, so maybe they pinched the idea from us.
One of the truths that the movie did depict, though, was the fact that Aussies were running the Parkes station, much like Tidbinbilla today.
Yeah, that's very true. The Parkes Radio Telescope is, of course, part of the CSIRO, their Astronomy and Space Science Division, still doing great work today in radio astronomy. And CSIRO is also our site contractor here, managing the station on NASA's behalf. The people that work here, all Australian. It's an all Aussie team. We're regarded as the best in the world at what we do. We have 90 of some of the best engineers, technicians, spacecraft communication people anywhere. We work very closely with our colleagues at our sister stations. If we do something better than anybody else, then we go and train them how to do it.
And another truth that I have to mention, we're standing obviously amongst many sheep paddocks here. There is a very good reason for that, isn't there?
Yeah, we're in the middle of a farm, so there are cows here and there are lots of sheep as well. And of course, the Parkes dish, everybody's like, what's it doing in the middle of a sheep paddock? The reason why is because very few sheep have mobile phones. So we stay nice and radio quiet, and that's really important. We're in quiet, peaceful valleys like this, so the hills around us shield us from line of sight radio noise coming from radios, televisions, mobile phones and so on. And we do ask people when they come into the valley to help us, to continue to listen for these little tiny signals we're trying to see from across the solar system by switching off or putting at least into flight mode their phones.
So Glenn, Tidbinbilla is a working station. There's a lot of research and communication happening, but it's also a place for visitors to come, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The site operates 24/7, but we have our visitor centre people can come along to. We're open every day except for Christmas Day, 9 to 5, and it's totally free. And they can learn a little bit more about the past, present and future of space exploration and the important work that we do here.
Fantastic. And there's also a cafe, I believe, with some pretty good food and coffee.
Yeah, Moon Rock Cafe. You can't have a place like this without having the Moon Rock Cafe. And they do great meals and snacks and everything else. So come along, grab a coffee, sit down and relax and watch some of the biggest dishes in the world communicate with spacecraft hundreds of millions, billions of kilometres away. Nothing's more relaxing.
Fantastic, Glenn. Thanks so much for the tour, and good luck with all of your future projects.
Thanks very much.